Who would have thought that 2024 would give us woke Al-Qaeda? The leader of HTS, Jolani, has had a wonderful makeover by the Western media. He's gone from brutal terrorist to woke ISIS, with newspapers lauding his diversity. It's crazy to think the West went directly from we need to bomb Afghanistan and occupy it for 20 years after 9/11 to yay, Al-Qaeda's now taken over Syria. If you told an American on September 12, 2001, that 23 years later, the Western media would be celebrating Al-Qaeda, they wouldn't believe you. HTS is led by Mohammed Abu al-Jolani. He was a former member of ISIS, which was then called Al-Qaeda in Iraq. He actually was sent by the leader of ISIS, Baghdadi, to Syria to start the Al-Qaeda affiliate there, which was called Al-Nusra. Al-Qaeda in Iraq was famous for its tactics of sparking sectarian warfare in Iraq by bombing Shia holy sites, by bombing markets, by bombing places where civilians were gathered. It was an atrocious campaign that really sparked the civil war in Iraq, which killed hundreds of thousands of people. How is it that this group, which has launched terrorist attacks in the West, but also caused untold devastation in the Middle East, is now presented as these freedom fighters? They can rebrand Al-Qaeda, who they spent years saying was the biggest enemy of the West during the war on terror. If they can now rebrand them as our friends, then they can do anything. The US empire and its allies run a ruthless and maximalist empire. Often in the Middle East, they use religious extremists to get rid of leaders they don't want. One of the problems with this is what is called blowback, where these extremists who they fund will then take their fight to the United States, which is what happened with Osama bin Laden, who was formerly on the CIA's payroll. There was a whole load of propaganda and PR done on the part of the Mujahideen. Look at what happened in Libya when we funded and armed and trained the rebels. The rebels became the great cause célèbre for the media. David Cameron called them lions. And then a few years later, these rebels are back in Manchester and blowing up an Ariana Grande concert, killing dozens of school kids. You see it again and again and again. Lessons are never learnt, because lessons can't be learnt, because these policies are not being made in the interests of us, the people in the US, the UK and Europe, or the people of the Middle East, who they see as pieces on a chessboard. They're being made in the interests of a small, narrow elite, so they can continue their geopolitical and corporate control of the world. And actually, the national security concerns and our own safety is a lower priority than that goal. In the UK, they're talking about removing HTS from the list of proscribed organisations. How is it that suddenly, when a group takes power and might start working for us, you can say they're not terrorists anymore? What does the term terrorist even mean? There's a great irony in this country where elderly Jewish people are being arrested by police for things they've said about Palestine under terrorism laws, yet the government is talking about removing HTS from the proscribed list because now it's in our interest. That's how terrorism works. It doesn't mean anything in reality. It's a term that is used by powerful forces in the West to demonize violence which is not in our interest, and it's removed instantly when that violence becomes in our interest. It's not just terrorists that get a rebrand if they start doing as they're told, or it's in our interest. It's also dictators. Look at Assad, a brutal dictator who ruled from 2000 when he took over from his dad, who had ruled from 1970. In 2001, Tony Blair became the first UK premier ever to visit Syria. And what that trip was about was to say to Assad, come into the fold, join us, and everything will be all right for you. They didn't care about the human rights atrocities. In fact, there was a report by Amnesty just before Tony Blair went talking about the horrific conditions in Syrian jails. That didn't feature at all in what they talked about. It was about how can we make Syria part of British and American power? How can we add Assad to our long list of Arab dictator clients? And then in 2002, the following year, Assad came to London and met with the Queen and Prince Charles, then lunched with Tony Blair. Tony Blair had thought about requesting the Queen bestow an honorary knighthood on Assad. This was all about bringing him into the fold, making him one of our own, making him our son of a bitch. It just shows these people don't care about brutal dictatorships. They only care about them if they stop doing as they're told. Keir Starmer said he welcomed the end of Assad's brutal regime.
Well, the people of Syria have lived under a brutal regime for far too long, so I welcome the fact that Assad is gone. I think the whole world welcomes that.
But where did he say that? He said that in the UAE, a brutal UK-backed dictatorship. His next stop after he made that speech was Saudi Arabia, one of the most brutal dictatorships in the world, which was actually installed by the British. And we have 11 soldiers permanently based in Riyadh working in the White Army, which is the personal protection force of the House of Saud, to make sure that democratic elements cannot overthrow that regime. So you see, it's all just lies, it's all propaganda. We don't care about dictators. In fact, we love dictators if they do what they're told. The point about Assad was he wasn't doing what he was told, and he was part of the axis of resistance. That's why he had to go. Tehran is where they want to go next, and they want to hit it hard, and they will hit it hard, because Trump is coming in, and no country did better from Trump's previous presidency than Israel. And he only has 4 years left. That means Israel's got a window to get everything they want to do over the next 4 years. And that's been Netanyahu's goal since the 1990s. When Netanyahu came into power in 1996, along with the Americans, they devised a plan to break up all state-backed resistance to Israel. There was a document inside Hillary Clinton's emails which were released by the State Department, which is a briefing about Israel and Syria and how the United States can help Israel's security. The document says, the best way to help Israel deal with Iran's growing nuclear capability is to help the people of Syria overthrow the regime of Bashar al-Assad. It is the strategic relationship between Iran and the regime of Assad in Syria that makes it possible for Iran to undermine Israel's security. Job done. There was a program called Operation Timber Sycamore, which began in 2012 and is actually one of the biggest CIA covert operations ever. It went on for 5 years and was budgeted at over $1 billion a year to arm and train the rebels who they wanted to overthrow Assad. And Israel itself admitted that they were giving aid to the Syrian rebels. They even went as far as to treat their fighters in Israeli hospitals.
The soldiers are bringing 3 wounded Syrian fighters into Israeli territory for urgent medical care. Since the start of Syria's civil war, about 1,300 Syrians have quietly received medical treatment inside Israel.
2 days after October 7th, Netanyahu met with mayors in the south of Israel and he said, remain steadfast, we are going to change the Middle East. What did he mean by this? Hamas destroyed, Hezbollah decapitated, Assad taken out, Yemen bombed, Iran next. Netanyahu's plan for destroying all resistance to the settler colonial project in the Middle East is coming to fruition. Netanyahu is happy, and he's happy for a reason. Netanyahu said what's happened in Syria is a result of our attacks on Hezbollah. He took credit for it. He's celebrating. He moved more troops further into Syria. They took more of Syria in the week following the fall of Assad than they took in the whole of the 1967 war. They're now saying that they're going to increase the number of settlers they're sending to the occupied Golan Heights. It's part of a plan for a greater Israel and a Middle East which has submissive, dismembered states that keep their people in check, and they give support to the Tel Aviv regime if they need it. And they can come out publicly and say, oh, it's a genocide, but essentially they're doing nothing to stop Israel. Who is making life difficult for Israel? Who is actually resisting their genocidal project in Palestine? That was Iran and Syria. It's now just Iran. All the Gulf states, which are also dictatorships, except this time US-backed and Israeli-backed, have done nothing to help the Palestinians. And that is the Middle East that Israel wants. They want smash states with no power to resist what Israel is doing in Palestine and maybe further afield now. Let's look at some historical examples when we celebrated a dictator who wasn't on the west side being taken out. Libya in 2011, when NATO, which we're told is about defending Europe from aggressive Russia, bombed a country in North Africa. 7,700 bombs in 8 months. Over 300 bombs a day. They destroyed Libya. It's now a failed state. Gaddafi was a dictator. It's a wasteland. But the oil went out to the Western companies, which was the goal of the NATO operation. Iraq in 2003, Saddam, another brutal dictator who ruled in part with US backing for the 80s when he was at war with Iran. And even after he bombed the Kurds in 1988 at Halabja, killing 5,000 people. Only in 1990, when the Gulf War started, when he invaded Kuwait, did the West turn on him. That's because the Middle East, like the whole world, is seen as a chessboard by the US empire and its allies. And people are supported when it's in our interest, when they can do things for us. When they stop, then we pull support. He was taken out in an invasion in 2003. And what happened after that? A brutal civil war, a brutal occupation. The country of 30 million people was destroyed. They then had to put up with ISIS, who ransacked large parts of the north of the country. The Kurds are another good example. The Kurds have been abandoned by the United States multiple times throughout the second half of the 20th century. I believe this will happen again with the new Trump administration. In his first presidency, Trump is thought to have said, why do I care about the Kurds? And wanted to pull support for them. When the Trump administration comes in next year and he wants to get close to Erdogan, he'll give him the green light to go into the Kurdish autonomous regions like Erdogan did in 2018 and destroy Afrin. And I think that Rojava will be destroyed completely. Rojava was a progressive, women-led movement that showed that the Middle East could be run in a different way. But it's going to be smashed because the Kurds have stopped being important to Western interests. The US only backed the Kurds, by the way, not because they were fighting ISIS, but because they sit upon the oil deposits we've been stealing for years, and wheat and agricultural resources. I really hope that the Syrian people have a chance for freedom, democracy and sovereignty. And who couldn't be touched by seeing the emptying of those hellholes that Assad kept thousands of political prisoners in? It was a beautiful moment. But look at history, look at Libya, look at Iraq. We need to support the Syrian people who want a sovereign country, of course, but we have to understand nothing good comes in the shadow of external empires. There's a new Sykes-Picot. Syria is being carved up. This is not good for anyone, especially the Syrian people. The Syrian people have a right to be happy that they've overthrown a dictator and they should be allowed to run their country as they want. But because of the imperial powers, they will never be allowed to do that. The country will be directed and the country will be built in the interests of external power. It's a tragedy. Syrians do have a right to enjoy freedom and sovereignty. They've lived under these brutal dictators for 54 years. Everyone has a right to freedom. But the US empire, the Israelis, Turkey, do not want them to be free. When we're on the precipice of global war, independent media has never been as important as it is now. The mainstream media locks out any kind of nuanced, intelligent debate on these topics. We need voices from across the spectrum who are saying uncomfortable truths to power to be heard. So join the future of journalism and join Double Down News on Patreon.